Ben hummed a pleasant tune as he foraged in the pale forest surrounding the fortress. He wouldn't dare do this before the ghoul outbreak, because heaven forbid his father think he was some bard's songbird and start beating the wolfhood back into him. But he didn't need to worry about that anymore. Ben's only concern was the ghouls, which didn't gather much around the fortress. He saw only 2 since he started foraging about an hour ago, but he didn't see, hear, nor even smell any others since then. He looked in his basket to see the supplies he'd gathered. The colourful assortment of berries, mushrooms and herbs sat within the fine wicker weave like a crude, yet nice-to-look-at salad. With the fully filled basket in one hand and a spear in the other, Ben started his march back to the fortress. As he walked, his mind kept wandering to Sir Umpty. The man had a curse that made parts of his body as delicate as fine porcelain, so he'd been relieved of his duty to the king. Ernest had showed growing suspicion of the man on multiple occasions, and Ben kept getting that itch in his ear that told him danger was close whenever the royal guardsman was nearby. Something wasn't right about that man, but what reason did Ben have to not trust him? Because his itchy ear said so? That itch has never been wrong before. But Umpty had been helping the survivors up until now, so why did Ben's instinct trigger whenever he was around? Then there was what Ernest said that one time. They say that the eyes are the window to the soul. Every time I look Sir Umpty in the eyes, I see nothing behind them. Those eerie words now hung in the front of Ben's mind. What did Ernest mean by that? He must have some grander reason not to trust Umpty. Ben decided that enough was enough. He was going to confront Ernest and ask him what was going on in that crooked head of his. He made it back to the fortress without encountering another ghoul. This place was rather out of the way, and Umpty said the less populated areas wouldn't have so many. Ben went inside and climbed the staircase down to the bunker below. He grabbed a lantern and made his way to the kitchen where Ernest was sorting out the supplies. "Hello, Ernest. I've brought more food and herbs." Ernest's misshapen back creaked as he turned around to look at the basket Ben brought. "And a fine collection you have here. I'd have hunted and got us meat, but I didn't find any animals out there, just a few stray ghouls. Probably scared off the game," Ernest sighed. "That's fine. Blick and Marge have been doing a lot of fishing since you left and managed to snag a good catch." "That's good." Ben glanced around before stepping closer. "Actually, Ernest, there's something I need to talk to you about." Ernest paused what he was doing. "It's about Umpty, isn't it?" Ben flinched. "How did you know?" Ernest's body creaked more as he turned around to face Ben again. "Wise old men have their ways of knowing things, most of which walk alongside intuition." Ben didn't know how to respond to that. He simply opted to ask his questions. "Do you have any particular reason not to trust him? I mean, he's not the nicest man to survive with, and he pisses Blick off a lot. But he has been helping us." Ernest took a moment to respond. "My suspicions first arose when my cabin was attacked. Remember when Marge's husband showed up?" "I remember. That was the whole reason the survivors came to this fort. Ernest's cabin had come under attack by a horde of ghouls. Unfortunately, Marge's husband, a hulking bear, was among the ghouls that attacked. Why? When we all went after him, he shrugged us off like nothing. Well, he was a bear. It takes a lot to bring them down. Even my father couldn't stand up to him. True, but when Umpty gave him one clean, not very deep slash across the chest, he turned and ran." Ernest adjusted his hat. Why would such a powerful being run away from someone with such an unimpactful injury? Ben hadn't thought about it since then, but Ernest was right. Marge's husband ran away after taking one good look at Umpty with his sword in hand. Why would such a strong foe do that? You think something's up with Umpty because of that? That's what started it. Then there was the knife incident yesterday. Blick was right. What business would a knife have sitting on a spoon set sideways? Ernest looked around before whispering to Ben more closely. And I saw your reaction at the front gate, after you came back from investigating. I suspect he said something that tickled your mind wrong. Ben didn't want to bring it up before, but if there was a time to say it, it was now. When he approached me, he asked if Blick and I cleared out the ghoul. Ernest tilted his brow. So? He said, ghoul, not ghouls? The tall, crooked man stared at Ben confused. There was only one ghoul in this whole place. He sounded like he already knew that. Ernest flinched. There was only one. And that's not the worst part. Ben hesitated. Blick and I chose to hide this from everyone, but this ghoul was not like the others. How so? It was a single ghoul, but not a single person. He gagged a bit as he remembered the grotesque visual. The ghoul was 3 separate speaker pigs who'd been sewn together haphazardly. Ernest reeled at the description. You're sure it was 3 beings? It had 3 heads, Ernest, and its body was covered in thick stitches holding the cut seams of distinct flaps of skin together. Ben took a seat on a nearby stool. That didn't happen on its own. Someone did that to them. The crooked man audibly gagged and covered his mouth with one hand. Where is it now? The body? We tossed it in the river. We didn't want anyone to see it. Ernest stepped back and leaned on the counter behind him. Good man. If it was half as bad as you've described, then it's a good thing you did so. Ben glanced in the direction of the hallway as 2 of Avery's kids ran by. Especially for their sake. His thoughts wandered to Umpty again. What about Umpty then? You think he might have some connection to the ghouls? Possibly, but I think for safety's sake we feign ignorance for now. Ernest turned his attention back to the counter. If he is involved, then he's probably a dangerous man. Ben nodded and slowly stepped toward the hall. Ben. He looked back at Ernest. If he does end up posing a threat, I suggest you be ready to deal with him. Ben tilted his brow. Deal with him? How? However you need to. With a stressed sigh, the wolf walked through the dark corridor with a dim lantern in hand. He'd been feeling uneasy around the royal guardsman, but now that the evidence suggested that he was involved with the ghouls somehow, Ben was even more stressed out. The sounds of childish giggling echoed from a nearby room. Avery's kids must be playing, he thought. Maybe that'll lift my spirits. Ben stepped closer to the side room where the kids were laughing. As he got close, he nearly tripped on something that darted across the floor. Whoa, whoa! After he regained balance, he looked down to see a messy green hat scampering away. Wait, isn't that the hat that... Hey! He got up and rushed after it. Several of the group members nearby peeked out into the hall when they heard Ben yell. Ben? Marge started. What's going on? Running after the odd intruder, he called out to everyone. It's the hat, the one from the road. It's here. Ernest peered at the floor, his gaze quickly locking on the hat as it scurried by. Madigan? Blick emerged from further down the hall. Blick, Ben howled. Stop that hat. The dwarf didn't spare a moment to snatch it as it tried to dart past him. Gotcha, you little scamp. He lifted the thing up into the air triumphantly. Ben caught up and stopped just in front of Blick. The hat in his hands was indeed the same one they saw on the road while on their way to the fort. The mismatched fabric, the peeling top, the fraying edges, even the ace of hearts tucked into the band. Everyone else caught up, and Ernest knelt down to inspect the hat himself. Yes, this is indeed Madigan Chapeau's hat. He tapped the top of the tattered garment. But the disrepair. Madigan may not be the most careful with his hats, but he'd never let his favourite get this damaged. Wah! Blick yelped. Something's moving inside it. Ben huffed as he watched the hat shuffle in Blick's grip. Turn it over. Blick turned the hat upside down, exposing a scurrying lump of brown fur inside. Is that a mouse? Nickel Dorman, Ernest chimed. The mouse, clearly a speaker, stood up in the hat. Ernest. Ben sighed. Another old friend of yours? Ernest stood up. Nickel is one of Madigan's close companions. He turned his attention to Nickel. But what are you doing with his hat? And where is Madigan? Nickel sat down in the hat. He's gone. He scratched behind his ear. He's become like most of the people in this kingdom. A lot of the land of wonder is the same. Even Madigan? Nickel's ears drooped as he nodded. Ben looked up at Ernest, who lowered his head. He returned his attention to Nickel. What are you doing anyway? Same as you, Nickel responded. Trying to survive. I've been snatching up everything I could to keep myself safe and moving. Then what are you doing here? After encountering you on the road, I figured it'd be wise to stay close to other survivors, so I followed you all here. Umpty, who stood behind Blick, flinched. Ben's ear itched horribly when he noticed Umpty. His conversation with Ernest earlier made him feel incredibly unsafe with the man right there. He turned his attention to Blick. Blick, can you hand the hat to me? Ernest and I need to talk to Nickel, alone. Blick eyed Ben strangely. Eh? What for, lad? Something sensitive. Who died and made you two the authority? Ernest knelt closer to Blick and whispered, It's not about authority, but it does concern our safety. Just hand Nickel over. Blick's eyes widened at Ernest's words. Ah, all right. He handed the hat with Nickel inside to Ernest, who then turned to leave. Ben followed him to the barracks cafeteria and stood by the counter where Ernest set the hat down. He leaned closer to Nickel. Did you, by any chance, see or hear anything that may incriminate the human in our group? The human? Nickel asked. That's the one named Umpty, right? Ben nodded. Why are you asking? Ernest knelt closer and spoke in a hushed tone. Ben and I spoke earlier of the possibility that Umpty knows more than he's letting on about the ghouls. We need to know if you know anything. Nickel looked between the two of them nervously. Upon seeing the concern in their expressions, he sighed. I think I saw one thing in this place, but I don't know if it has any names pinned on it. Ben looked at Ernest, their eyes meeting in concern. What do you mean? Nickel, visibly sensing the urgency of discretion, hopped out of the hat and motioned them closer. There's a blocked-off room in this place. The wall is still fresh, but I was able to sneak through a gap where a brick is missing. At first, I thought it was a torture chamber, like you see in a castle dungeon, but there were so many exotic tools. Ben's ears drooped as his mind went back to the Three Pigs ghoul. Where is it? I'll show you tonight, when everyone else is asleep. Ben and Ernest looked at each other again, silently contemplating what Nickel was planning to show them. A dungeon with exotic tools? Too many ideas and scenarios rushed through Ben's mind as he compared this new information to the forcibly amalgamated pig ghoul. What's more, it was evidently inside the fortress where the survivors were trying to hide. If such a thing was in there with them... All right, we'll wait until dark, Ben whispered. Until then, Nickel, keep quiet about it. Nickel hopped back into the hat and turned it over to cover him. I'll lay low until we go. Ben looked up at Ernest. The look of disdain on his face said it all. Whatever was hiding down here, it could answer everything and possibly endanger everyone at the same time. Umpty must not know about their plans.